I do have struggles, and or we do have grief. We do lose people in our lives. So it's not melancholy. Is you can still have joy while you're going through a season of melancholy, which is a season of losing somebody. And so what I had lost was my way with this when I was betrayed, with the sense of what that inner purpose was, and I knew that God wanted me to do a particular thing, but it had been ripped away from me. And so in rediscovering that sense of purpose, inner purpose, I was able to sort of climb out of the hole. But it took community, that is the community of my wife particularly, to get me there.
We're taking the Joy Challenge with pastor and best-selling author Randy Frazee, and he's going to share with us the secret to experiencing real, lasting joy. Well, I actually love the subtitle of your book. So it's the Joy Challenge, Discovering the Ancient Secret to Experiencing Worry-Defeating, Circumstance-Defying Happiness. Who doesn't want that?
Right?
That sounds awesome.
Sign me up.
Exactly. Well, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be with you guys. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here. You've woven together research about science of happiness, and this is cool, connected to the Apostle Paul and his masterclass on joy in the book of Philippians. So how did your idea for this book come about?
Well, I started teaching this, as a new pastor back when I was 28 years old. So, I've been mining this from the first time I taught it for about 27 years. And then my publisher, HarperCollins Christian, or Thomas Nelson, asked me for some books, and this was the one top of my list. And I said, I think people need joy. But I signed the contract before COVID. So this was the third of 3 books. And I had no idea, this is how God works, I had no idea, that the need for joy would be greater than it's ever been, at least in my lifetime. And so basically, as a writer, you're looking for things that are, first of all, passionate for you. And for the most part, I've been a joyful person, but I have gone through couple bouts of sort of episodic depression, one through just imbalance, another through betrayal that kind of snuck up on me. So it's not super chronic, but it was episodic. So I understand what it's to be down in the dumps. I understand depression. So I was super interested in how do we take these spiritual principles and sort of kind of rise out of the ashes, for sure. I also wanted to write a book that wouldn't just make people smarter about joy, but would actually increase their joy. And that's why we conformed it into a challenge. And so, and then, the last thing I would say is, and this came after I signed the contract, is I was just listening to a podcast or reading a book on neuroscience, and I thought, well, this is really close. This is like not even close. This is identical to what Paul is suggesting here. And so I began to just do some investigation and discovered that what Paul was writing in AD 62-ish is really matching up with what we just discovered about the brain. So it all woven in together to convince and encourage and inspire a person to go after these ancient principles.
I like that. We're going to have smart joy. It's the best kind of joy to have. I love that you had a reminder of our own Declaration of Independence in the beginning of the book. That's pretty cool.
Yes.
And so tell us, what is the Joy Challenge? What's the challenge?
Yeah, the challenge is, first of all, I think there's kind of a double entendre there. First of all, joy is a challenge. If it was easy, we would all be experiencing it, and I wouldn't be able to write a book on it. But the Joy Challenge is also similar to what a lot of, exercise people are doing now, the 75-day challenge. This is a 25-day challenge. And the reason I formed it into a challenge, again, is because I don't want you to be smarter about joy. I want you to actually experience joy. Scientists tell us it takes about 21 days of consistency to reform our brains, to develop a new habit or a character. So I did 25 to give us 4 extra days to make sure that it really got locked in and loaded. And so the challenge, it really involves 4 things. Number 1, you read the chapter for the day. It's a short chapter, or you can listen to it on audio. I know a lot of people like to listen on the run.
Yep.
Well, the second thing is there's something I'm going to give you to do that's very doable in that day. And there's also a free downloadable journal that you can sort of record and journal along the way. The third thing I have is 4 really not too hard memory verses out of the book of Philippians that you memorize, hiding God's word in your heart over the 25-day period. And finally, the last thing is that you review it. And there's a little downloadable Joy Cube. I know those who are listening won't be able to see it, that you print and you fold up, and I invite you to carry it with you everywhere you go for 25 days. And what that's going to do is going to keep these principles before you, and it's also going to evoke conversation. When you then have to explain it, it's going to delve it deeper into your mind, and your joy is going to increase.
I like that.
I do.
That's cool.
That's awesome to have a tool to go along with it. Well, also, your book is divided into 4 parts. I love the whole organization that you put together. So can you share why you chose those specific areas to focus on and in this journey that we're taking towards joy?
Yeah, Sally, great question. I'm glad you asked it. Actually, it was Paul who wrote this little letter called Philippians, made up of 1,629 words, which is a whole lot less than a sermon that I give. And so, wow, that's amazing when you really think about it. It's like, why can't I get that much done in that amount of time? But Paul's 4 chapters were divided this way, and this is the secret of the book. It's not a joy that's dependent on your circumstances, but rather it's despite it. So chapter 1 of Philippians, and also the part 1 of my book, is a joy despite your circumstances. Chapter 2, or part 2 of my book, is joy despite other people. Ooh. One of the big joy robbers of our life.
No kidding.
Yeah, despite them.
The heart.
Right to the heart. The third one is a really big one, joy despite our past, which is a really big deal. And the last one is joy that defies worry. Also deep in that chapter is a principle that you could say joy despite my stuff, because stuff sometimes is a big joy robber. But the bigger idea in chapter 4, or part 4 of the book, is defying the worry that overcomes our life.
Wow. I mean, you really hit it. Those are the 4 things that just rise their head and steal our joy like that in an instant.
Yeah, so I don't have to mean to interrupt you. I call them joy robbers in the book.
Yes.
And the thing that a lot of us want to do, hey, we're going to have joy if we can eliminate these things from our life. And what Paul is saying is, like, you can't necessarily eliminate these things. You got to find a way to rise above them. I had a professor in seminary who always gave the illustration. He said, when I ask people how they're doing, they'll say, I'm doing pretty good under the circumstance. And he says, what are you doing under there for? And so there is an opportunity. Then Paul's going to give us these principles. Under each part, I present 5 principles from Paul that he's either giving to us explicitly. He's telling us this is how you increase your joy, or implicitly watching how he's living while he's under house arrest, which is a pretty stinky circumstance. And he's experiencing pretty amazing joy, even though he's chained to a smelly Roman guard 24/7.
Yeah. Just that word picture kind of puts you right there a little bit. But so I'm loving the whole setup that we have here of the organization that you thought to put through and touch on all these joy robbers. But why do you believe joy is best cultivated in community? Like, what's the importance of community and fellowship as far as fostering joy?
Oh, that's a great question, Sally. It is a major part of this. As a matter of fact, when you look at Paul's writings, he talks very early on a principle about learning how to love, and this is all about the importance of attachment. And God has wired your brain in such a way that you desire and require community. And whenever you don't have it, you introduce a lot of very devastating components in your life. For example, I wrote in the book, when you are alone, our brains know that we are vulnerable and it puts our body into a survival mode. Stress hormones are released, which are not good. And if we stay in this state for an extended period of time, it takes a toll on our minds, our bodies, and our souls. In fact, loneliness in older people is twice as unhealthy as obesity and increases the odds of death in any given year by 26%.
Wow.
So, if you're going to eat a tray of Oreos every night, for goodness sake, don't do it alone.
This is now a fitness podcast.
Exactly. If it involves eating Oreos, I'll do it with anybody.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go.
And if I can interrupt there, I think that again, learning how to love. So you have a part in it. It's not just being in community for your benefit, but learning the secret of love. There was a study done by Harvard that began in 1938. It's the longest study studying humans that we have, and they basically took 250 plus sophomores from Harvard and 450 young boys from around the Boston area that were from challenged neighborhoods, and they basically were looking for the holy grail of happiness. And they've been studying these people these people are now in their 80s.
Wow.
And they've been following them in a very intense way. Their assumption, because when you do study, you have to have an assumption. The assumption was the Harvard boys would be happier, and now these guys are in their mid 80s, and going to Harvard was not a predictor of happiness. As a matter of fact, money, fame, and power were not a predictor of happiness. The number one predictor of happiness, wait for it, loving relationships. People who have loving relationships, regardless of where they went to school, regardless of how much money they have, are people that are going to experience happiness. And Paul emphasizes that in his book, particularly in the principle, Learning How to Love. It's an art.
It just hit me. An epiphany.
Oh, hold on for it.
So for the first time, Randy, you talked about experiencing depression at one point in your life. And during COVID and the whole pandemic and lockdowns, we weren't supposed to see each other. And that's when I first experienced that in my life. I was like, my wife deals with depression and anxiety. And I'm like, okay, now I know what my wife Becky is dealing with on a daily basis. And we're in a time where we're not supposed to necessarily be in relationships. And so I wonder if 2 and 2 to go together for a lot of us, you couldn't connect with people the way you wanted to. Did that affect your happiness? What do you think, Randy?
100%. I mean, absolutely, unequivocally. And, certainly the book of Philippians is emphasizing this. Even for Paul in the book of Philippians, the church at Philippi, who's writing the letter to, had sent a guy named Epaphroditus 800 miles to deliver not only to deliver a gift to Paul, and he was assigned to stay with Paul during his house arrest, so that Paul would not be alone. So even Paul under house arrest has this deep, tremendous friendship with Epaphroditus. And when we experienced the pandemic, particularly amongst our kids who were left out of school in these young, formidable ages, it was just super devastating. And I'm not a doctor, so please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. It almost would have been better for the kids to be exposed to the virus and survive it than to be left alone. So I hope people understand what I'm saying about that, because I know it wasn't that super impactful for kids, but what was impactful for kids was leaving them isolated in these formative years. And and I don't think that's just for kids, it's for adults as well. Loneliness was already at a pandemic level. Years ago, I had a good friendship with Dr. George Gallup of the Gallup Poll, and he wrote a book called The People's Religions, and said that Americans, even in the late 90s, were the loneliest people on the planet. We have people all around us, but we're not connected to any particular people. So we are already the loneliest people on the planet. Then you add a pandemic, and now we are really truly have a pandemic, not just of a virus, but we have a pandemic of loneliness.
Wow.
Something that you touched on earlier that I want to go back to is emphasizing that joy is very dependent on our mindset and our attitude. as opposed to our external circumstances. And I immediately thought of, I struggle with mental health issues, and so I take medication for that. And it was back in 2015, something like that. I stopped responding well to medication, and it became a pretty dire situation very quickly. And so I had to be hospitalized to do a quick meds change. And I remember sitting in the intake lobby with my husband. I'm getting ready to be checked into the psych ward for goodness knows how long. And we were making jokes about everything. Like I know that they must have thought I was having a breakdown in that lobby because we were laughing so hard. And once I got to my room that night, I was like, that's really interesting. And I know that I must have God was providing me with joy in the midst of that. But I know that there was something there that I was able to flip my mindset and concentrate on that. I don't know that I've ever been able to do it again. But yeah, so it's not connected to what's going on with us. Like, delve into that a little bit, because I've always looked back and gone, how did I do that?
Yeah, I'll say a couple things, but you really sparked a lot of kind of fires for me here. But I think one thing for people to know is that the brain is a 3-pound mass in your head. Your mind is what you do with it. And that's a good way to think about it, okay? And so you have the power over your brain. You do have the power more than any of the creatures of the sea or for example, reptiles. We call it the reptilian part of our brain. It comes right up here to the brainstem. We have that. It's all instinct. So if you have an iguana and you're thinking that you're petting it and it's loving you, it doesn't even have the ability to love you. I'm so sorry.
By the way, Randy, Misty is a huge animal lover, so you're striking a chord here. This is funny.
You destroyed what I thought about our bearded dragon that we had for a while. He didn't love us.
Your bearded dragon wanted to eat you. That's
good thing he was in a cage.
and then there's the mammalial part of our brain, which is we call it the basement of the brain or the center of your brain, and that's what the animal kingdom has, which is what you see all the things they're doing. They're doing it on instinct. They don't have the ability to evaluate. They don't have the ability to project in the future. They don't have it. We have this thing on the upstairs of our brain called the neocortex, and it's this amazing thing that God gave us that gives us the ability to evaluate as well as to project into the future. And we've now learned through neuroscience that the brain can change and can grow brand new character and things. You're never stuck in the past. It's called neoplasticity and epigenetics. Epigenetics, you can pass it on to your kids. So in the book of Philippians, Paul is going to use the word joy, which is the word kara, 16 times, but he's also going to use the word mind or mindset 16 times. And what he's pointing out there is the major theme in my book is joy, despite all of these circumstances. But you can have this joy if you have the right mindset. That outlook determines outcome. And I think of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, in the Gulag, and they were beating them and starving them. And at one point he just said, "You can take everything away from me, but you can't take my attitude." Wow. And so what you were doing is that you were engaging in a practice, and when you found a little bit of laughter, as you know, releases endorphins and dopamine, which are the chemicals you want to actually feel joy. Joy is not a feeling, but there are ways in which your body has been wired by God in the brain to actually experience joy. So here you are in a dire situation, and you're laughing, and you found a way to look at it in its temporal situation as it is, and you found a little bit of joy. And Paul's going to give us 20 such ways to increase our joy despite our circumstances.
I love that. You talk about the principles focused on maintaining joy in relationships. And one thing that you mentioned that we've talked about often is elevating others above yourself, making it about them as opposed to you. So I was just curious how these principles have impacted your personal relationships, because obviously there's something you're using as well.
Yes, I am using all these principles, and just like you, Misty, I don't struggle with ongoing depression, but if I don't practice these principles along with a couple of other basic things like a good night's sleep and things like that, and exercise. I just ran a 5K here before our call. Then I will put myself in a dangerous situation. So a lot of the people listening or watching, they need to put some foundations in their life and practice some principles. You can't just let life come at you. You've got to, as Paul says, you've got to take every thought captive, right? And so it's been very, very helpful for me when I was experiencing depression, for example, and I had a bunch of people around me, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, hey, I had some medications. Well, I did. I had to take medications for a while, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's everything right with that. No one should feel shame. We take aspirin or Aleve when we have an ache in our muscle. And we also need to take some medication when we have some aches in our brain, right? And it's okay. I think it can get out of hand. Like, so for me, one of the principles that I practiced when I was experiencing depression comes right out of the first pages of the book. Of the book and of the chapter. Paul, in the very beginning of the book, opens up, and you wouldn't think of it as a joy principle, but he uses the word joy. He says, I pray with joy every day when I think of you. I pray with joy. So what is he doing? He is intentionally, not haphazardly, but he's intentionally going to prayer. And in his prayer, he's recalling happy memories of the Philippians, who are the only people that supported him throughout his ministry from beginning to end. Well, how does that increase your joy? We now know that whenever that our memories are stored in a place called the hippocampus. It's in the center of our brain. All of your memories are stored there. And whenever you recall that memory, it strengthens that memory. So when you strengthen a memory that brings you joy, it helps you to cope with the current circumstances that you're dealing with. So practically for me, all throughout my office here in my home, I have pictures of people that have believed in me, that stood for me, that introduced me to Jesus, people that believed in me to write my first book, people that believed in me and mentored me, and I just have pictures of them all over my office, so that whenever I'm beginning to feel a tinge of sort of anxiety or whatever, I turn around and I look at them, I pause and I pray, and I remember where we're at, the smells, I remember what was the music that was going on, and I recall those memories, and it strengthens those memories, and it holds down the current anxiety that I'm experiencing. So that's just one way in which one principle not only helped me when I was depressed, clinically depressed, but it helps me every single day to keep my joy quota up.
Like that.
That's cool. So throughout the book, you shared your personal experiences. Can you share an experience where you struggled to find joy? Maybe you just kind of did. I don't know. And how you applied that principle to overcome it.
Yes. So for me, one of the deep, dark seasons of my life came through a betrayal. Maybe some of the people listening or watching have experienced betrayal. Dante in the Towering Inferno puts people who betray other people at the lowest part of hell in his book. Wow. Because we rely so much on trusted friendships that whenever they are betrayed, it does something dramatic to our soul. And so I was unaware, because as a pastor, you live somewhat in a fishbowl. You get accustomed to criticism, some of it fair, some of it not, some of it constructive, some of it destructive. But in this particular case, it was pretty destructive, and it caught me off guard. And man, I went down. And what happens is you go down into the fear part of your brain where the animals live, and this is what God's given you, to deal with fearful situations in your life. And it's a mechanism that immediately will send a message to you, the adrenal gland, to release adrenaline and cortisol to give you the energy to either to freeze or to fight or to flight, right? And that's what a lot of people that are listening and watching are doing. They're immediately going into that fear place and living in a constant state of fear. So one of the things that happened to me is that my wife saw this depression. and it affected her dramatically. It affected our income. It affected lots of things in our life. And what she did, there's a principle in Paul's writings which says, "Do right by other people." Do right by other people. And what my wife did is she basically came alongside of me and was doing right by me. And one of the things that helped me come out of my depression is that I got an opportunity to reestablish myself in my work, but it required a move. And this move was going to be very difficult. And I told Roseanne, there's no way we're going to do this. But she saw in my eyes that if I could actually, get back to where I am experiencing that sense of purpose again, it would really help me. And so we ended up making the move. And I began to emerge out of the depression. I began to wean myself off of the pills, and I found that sense of purpose again. And so Roseanne was doing right by me, and I looked her in the eye one time and said, "You know what? You never would let me let you talk about how this affected you." And she said, "Yeah, I didn't want to bring up how it was painful for me because I didn't want to take you back into a deeper sense of pain." And I said, "Did it bring you joy that you were able to do right by me, even at your own cost?" And she says, "You have no idea the amount of joy it brought me." And so just hearing how my wife had done that for me has brought is a principle that has brought me joy now as I seek to do it for other people. And this is exactly what Paul is doing in the book of Philippians. We talked earlier about Epaphroditus. Well, Epaphroditus got homesick. We believe that was his illness, and he was homesick. And Paul, who really desperately needed Epaphroditus, did right by Epaphroditus by sending him back to Philippi. And Paul said it was too painful to watch him in this situation, so he did right by Epaphroditus, sending him back to Philippi. And Paul said, even though he lost, it brought him joy. And I think a lot of people, particularly in America, need to understand that suffering sometimes is a pathway to joy. Giving up something that you want for the sake of others, God has wired us in such a way that will bring us joy.
That's just huge, what you just said there. Suffering can be a pathway to joy. Oh, I need to...
That's going to make some people's head go, huh?
Yeah.
I know. Wow. Love it.
You talked so, and it sounds like moving could help. Is just getting. Are you talking like a physical, like you moved in from one town to another?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
Moved,
Gotcha.
literally. Yeah. Not nothing mystical here. Just a good old fashioned.
Yeah.
Good old fashioned move. A joy in the scriptures is not defined as a feeling. But rather it's defined as inner contentment and purpose. When you study the context of joy, not just in Philippians, but throughout the scriptures, you're going to find that what the author is talking about is the person having an inner sense of purpose, and then also of a contentment, being okay, whether you have a lot or you have a little. That's in chapter 4, right? And so we're not promoting what's called toxic positivity. Dr. Dan Siegel from the Mind Institute says, man, keep driving that point home, is that people are going to look at your book and go, oh, this is all about, posting things on Instagram that make it look like I'm happy all the time. And I got to walk around like, Misty, you got to walk around like I don't have struggles, I do have struggles, and or we do have grief, we do lose people in our lives. So it's not melancholy is you can still have joy while you're going through a season of melancholy, which is a season of losing somebody. And so what I had lost was my way with this when I was betrayed, with the sense of what that inner purpose was. And I knew that God wanted me to do a particular thing, but it had been ripped away from me. And so in rediscovering that sense of purpose, inner purpose, I was able to sort of climb out of the hole. But it took community, that is the community of my wife particularly, to get me there.
You brought up an example of how Paul confronted two ladies who were at odds with each other. And let's talk about the role of forgiveness in joy. Discuss the impact forgiveness can have on joy.
Yes, these poor ladies, Eodia and Syntyche, it's really interesting that they never even tell us what it is they were fighting about, that wasn't even the point of it. And I think a lot of times in our conflicts with other people, what we're even fighting about it's so not important that, Roseanne and I have been in a fight sometimes and we have forgotten, a week later, now what was it again we were so absolutely angry about? And here Yodi and Syntyche are just at odds with one another. They were helpful in ministry, they were productive, they weren't losers, they just got sideways with each other, and it doesn't even bring out what it is. I feel so bad for them because their conflict was recorded in Scripture, so people have been studying them. When we get to heaven, we're going to go, oh, that was you. And they're going to go, God, I wish we had never, it's not that big of a deal. Why did Paul include it in his letter, in Syntyche? But what happens when you create conflict and you don't look for forgiveness, you create not only a lack of joy for you, but you create a lack of joy for everybody around you. I grew up in an unchurched home, and my parents, my dad didn't have a dad, and so he really didn't understand how to be a good husband, and so he just didn't really treat my mom really that well. To be honest with you, and if my siblings are watching or listening, they would go, "Yeah, he did." I mean, cut him some slack. He started at negative. He started at -50. George Gallup helped me to realize that my dad didn't start +10 on the scale. He started at -50, and through his leadership, he brought me. So I was born into at least a +1 world. He started at -50, so you got to cut him some slack. However, the way in which they fought, which my dad would go on these silent treatments, for 2 weeks he wouldn't speak to my mom in the home, and it just affected our entire home, and it created in me a sense of insecurity in my relationships that I took into my marriage. And so we have to realize that when we don't seek to elevate others above ourselves, or when we create conflict, we're not only creating stress for ourselves. In the Bible, the word peace is a cousin of the word joy. It's the word eirene in the Greek. And peace is not the feeling of peace, but rather peace in the Scriptures is about relational harmony. When we have harmony in our relationships, then we have peace. Peace with God, peace with others, peace with ourselves. And then from that, the brain can release the feeling of peace. Whenever you try to pursue peace, the feeling of peace, without making things right or following the Scriptures, you get yourselves into trouble because you start taking medications, you start drinking too much to get the feeling of peace. The peace is never that way. We say that when you don't then forgive somebody, that it's like drinking poison, thinking it's going to hurt the other person or kill the other person. You've heard that line before?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
So, like for me, when I was betrayed, it was really, really hard. But I knew this was a principle that Paul taught, and so every day, whether I felt it or not, I would forgive my betrayers. And it took 2 years for my brain to really believe it. But eventually I did, and I have reconciled those relationships. Randy Frazee does not want to go to his grave, as far as it is possible with me, does not want to go to my grave carrying anything like that would have devastating effects on me or other people. And it's hard, but if you pursue it, God will give you the strength to do it. And in the process, it will increase your joy. I don't have to worry if I run into these people in the mall. It's all been made right. We're not going to be best friends again, but it's all been made right. And I can go to bed and sleep like a baby.
Yeah, that's where you get that peace right there. You remind me of back when I was 25 years old, I went through a difficult divorce, and now I've doubled that age. But
I'm 50.
Yeah. But Randy, it's interesting. I would be driving down the road, think about the scenario, and I literally would shout it out loud. I'm not thinking about this. I'm releasing her. I'm forgiving her. Because she had cheated on me is basically what happened, and had an affair. And I was literally had to almost yell it over and over again to get my brain exactly what you're talking about to finally get there.
Yeah, no, this is a good principle. Again, that's what we talked about Your brain is a 3-pound organ in your body. Your mind is what you do with it. And Paul says, take every thought captive, meaning that everything that comes into your mind, hold it in a holding tank, a prison tank, and interrogate it before you release it in your brain. And what happens with people is when there's been some sort of betrayal like you've experienced, you go into the amygdala, which is the fear part of your brain, and you start ruminating on the mistakes you made and what they did to you, and you start rehearsing at night all of the things, and you remember it, and it just digs you deeper and deeper. And see, I did that with the betrayal initially, and what happened is then I go like, oh, I don't want to be down here anymore. But here's the deal. If you stay in the basement of your brain too long, you can't get back up. Someone closes the door, and you're going to be in big trouble. So do not let conflict with other people. Do not ruminate on it, but basically continue to go like, I'm not going to think about this. Go back to the Old Testament. Joseph of the Old Testament, if you recall his story, he was betrayed by his brothers. They wanted to kill him, but instead they roughed him up and sold him into slavery, into Egypt, or to a band of gypsies who sent to slavery. And you can imagine the amount of trouble that he had forgiving his brothers. And this is one of the most beautiful stories of forgiveness and reconciliation in the Bible. And so at one point, 22 years later, this has all turned out for the good, as Romans 8:28 says. And now Joseph is second in command, and he gave him a dream when he was 14 that his brothers would now bow down to him. And now 22 years later, his brothers come, and unbeknownst to them, they're bowing down. They're hungry. They want food. The dream has been fulfilled. And now he says later, but it's the same concept. He says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And so somewhere along the way, Joseph was able to discover that God was doing something bigger. So when someone betrays you, you have to recognize what they did was evil. You never have to justify it. But if you align your life to the principles of God, He's promising to write a good story for your life, and you need to rise above that and discover it. I think the reason that God allowed Joseph to go through 22 years of up and down, because when he got there, he was thrown, he was elevated and thrown into prison by another lie, up and down. The guy forgot to tell him about interpreting the dream, up and down, because it's going back to this concept of God pruning us and crushing us so that we will learn to trust in Him. And Paul in chapter 3 says, nothing matters to me except knowing Jesus, because when you know Him, then you can handle life in a major way. And so at some point, Joseph captured that and was able to forgive their brothers. And you'll note in the story that they were never able to forgive themselves for what they did to him. But he was able to move on, and after that lived 72 more years in this wonderful place of joy. May we do the same thing.
No
Yes.
kidding. Wow.
Wow. I mean, it's just amazing what I'm hearing about. It's what we're rehearsing in our minds. It's what we constantly won't let go of. And so your book takes us on this 25-day joy challenge experience. And I think I'll just speak for myself. Thinking about taking on a 25-day joy challenge is daunting because I don't want to not do it if I launch into it. So tell us how this can really transform our lives as we're working through this joy challenge.
Well, your brain is like a muscle, and if you don't exercise it properly, it's not going to go well for you, right?
Right.
And so each day you practice something different, and hopefully you get so much. You get a little bit of movement that will encourage you to go to day 2. Also, super encourage you to do it with a friend or do it with a small group of people, because we know, like, there's a statistic on creating, building habit. Because what we're trying to do here is build a joy habit. We're trying to build a habit that produces joy. So they've done some studies on how to break a habit. It's the same principles on how to develop a good habit. So if you want to quit smoking, for example, and you try to do it on your own, your statistical chances of success are a big fat 0. If you add a tool like a nicotine patch, your chances inch up to 5%. However, if you add with that nicotine patch a community support, your chances jump all the way up to 40%.
Wow.
And the same thing is true with the Joy Challenge, is that if you will do this in community, the principles are laid out. Paul has given us the principles. I've tried to lay the book out so you can kind of take it in bite-sized pieces. And your driving passion has to be not that I finish a 25-day challenge and check it off, but the driving passion is maybe, just maybe, at the end of this, I'll be able to have a greater sense of joy in my life that I didn't have before. And if you want that, well, here's a pathway to it.
Yeah. Wow.
You talk about the importance of celebrating others' successes and surrounding yourself with the right people and finding joy, because that's a pretty key component. Can we delve into that for a second?
Yeah, I'm so glad. I was like, oh, please ask me that question. Well, thank you. Because again, this is one of the principles that's implicit in Paul's writing. He's writing this letter of Philippians, and he's going to send it back through Epaphroditus. It's going to be sealed, and in the letter, he's got a young man that he has been mentoring by the name of Timothy. And he's inviting them to receive Timothy, and he goes on to celebrate the success in Timothy's life. He says, everyone looks out for their own interests, but not Timothy. He goes on to riff about Timothy for a few more sentences. He told the Philippians, I have no one else like him in my life. He has proven himself. And what he's doing in this chapter is going back to chapter 2 and comparing Timothy with Jesus. And you can imagine how Timothy felt when that letter was read out loud.
Yes.
Have you ever been in a spot where you have been in a crowd and you weren't aware of this, and someone read something out loud about you that was celebrating who you are? Can you imagine the amount of joy that brought to Timothy? And here's the deal: whenever you celebrate someone else's success, it strengthens the bond between you. When you strengthen the bond between you, then that's going to increase your joy. Matter of fact, in the letter, Paul says, and I am eager to get information about you guys from Philippi. I'm so eager to hear about the good news of how you're coming along and the success you're having. And he ends up by saying, oh, how that will do my heart good. Oh, how that will do my heart good. So if you want to be a joyful person, don't look for people to always celebrate you. Don't be the me monster here, but rather turn your attention to other people. And again, this is what I love about Scripture. It's a sort of counterintuitive. If you want to experience joy, celebrate other people's success. Now, if you can give me just a second, I want to talk about some research that was done on 4 different ways to respond to people when they bring you good news. Do I have a second to talk about that?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's 4 possible responses. The first one's called active and constructive. Someone comes to you and gives you good news. So active and constructive says, wow, that's terrific. Can you give me more details on how all that unfolded? How are you feeling right now? Yeah. So that's the first, and that's what you really want to be, the person who, when someone shares good news, you do that. The second one is passive and constructive. It's this short, oh, that's nice. And researchers say that can be just as destructive as an outright negative response.
Wow.
So you just go and you say, wow, you bare your soul and like, hey, I accomplished this goal. And you're like, oh, that's nice. And you move on. That's very destructive. The next one is active destructive. You share something and the person says, oh, I suppose that will mean even less time with your family, or I sure hope you can do that job. Meaning the person is being active. They're responding to you, but their response is destructive. And the worst one of all is called passive destructive. Passive destructive. The person shares something with you and that person says, hey, where are we going to dinner tonight? Doesn't even acknowledge. So what I want to say, if you want to increase your joy, you need to get really good at celebrating other people's successes. You got to get really good at it. And the way in which you do that is by active constructive. When someone shares something with you, pause and go like, oh my gosh, can we sit down and talk about this a little bit more? Now, in my estimation, women are better at that when women are healthy. Men, not so much. And so for a guy, particularly, to sit down and say, man, could we like ruminate on this just a little bit, and how are you feeling? And so you got to get good at celebrating other people's success, and it will make your heart good.
Yeah. Love that.
I think you're right about that. Like when I listen to my wife on the phone with her best friend, they're so encouraging to each other.
Yep.
Just nonstop. And me with my buddies, it's not like you're not encouraging. It's like we're missing a key component there, though. It's just not the same. It really isn't.
Yeah, it really isn't. Again, now, and so for Sally and Misty, you know that if you get on the dark side of that, there was the Seinfeld episode, if I can bring that up, that where, Jerry and George and them were talking about having a fight, and how when guys have a conflict, they just punch each other, then it's over, let's go have a beer. And then they ask, and Elaine says, you guys are just so silly. She says, well, how do you girls do it? She says, oh, we simply talk behind each other's back until one of us develops an eating disorder. Right? I mean, that's pretty... So women are not less sinful, but women have when women are healthy, they do a better job with this. I watch my wife the same way do this. So if you want to just be a step above as a guy, when a guy shares something, on the golf course, at the water tank, or whatever it is, to go back to them and say, hey, can I ask you a few questions about that? Because I'm super curious about that. And I'm just telling you, you will be in the 1%. And not only will it bring another person joy, but whenever there's a definition of joy, Dr. Alan Shore gives it. He says, joy is when I see the sparkle in somebody else's eye that you are pleased with me. Mm. And there's something, and we actually have a part of our brain right behind our eyes that whenever we look into someone else's eye and we see that sparkle that they are pleased with us, it actually stimulates right here behind your eye. It stimulates and releases a sensation in our brain that actually is the experience of joy. And that is a gift you can give to someone else. So when you give it to somebody else, and you see what it's done to them, Paul's saying it's going to turn around and do the same thing for you.
Yeah.
I love that. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. We've got pastor and author Randy Frazee with us, discussing his latest book, The Joy Challenge, to discover the ancient secret to experiencing worry-defeating, circumstance-defying happiness. I want that.
Yeah.
Don't we all? Yes.
No kidding. It's been wonderful. Hey, if people want to know more about you, how can they find out about you?
Yeah, the best place would be to go randyfrazee.com. That's my website where you can hear messages from me, get more information on the Joy Challenge and other things that I've written. Then it'll link you to my Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and things like that, where we post things about our family. And for example, we're getting ready to post. We haven't done it yet. We have 4 children. My son in Washington, D.C., and his wife just adopted 3 children from Bulgaria, and they've been home now for 3 weeks. And so if you want to know the Randy, the pastor author, you can go there, but also you can peel back and see Randy, just a normal guy that's trying to get along like everybody else. And, that's for sure.
And speaking of, you talked about moving. You used to be in San Antonio. Now you're in the Kansas City area. We have a Family Life Radio in Kansas City. So if people want to go visit you at church, how do they do that?
Well, the name of our church is Westside Family Church. So there we go. It's one big happy family here. And so Westside Family Church, we have 3 campuses. The primary campus is in Lenexa, Kansas, on the west side of Kansas City. Okay. It's a wonderful, wonderful church. I'm just so pleased to be the lead pastor there. And you can also watch us online like many other churches. Just go to our website and you'll find the online link.
Cool. Thank you so much. This has been really good. Yeah.
Very rich. Really.
Are you all ready to take the Joy Challenge?
Yes, please.
Awesome. Thank you, Randy, for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah. God bless you guys.